I remember the sound before I saw him, a low, strangled groan, carried just faintly on the late afternoon prairie wind. The sun was dropping low, spilling gold across the fence line as I made my rounds. My husband had been gone near 3 years now, and the ranch had grown to quiet in his absence. Still, I knew every sound this land made: the creak of the barn door, the whistle of the wind through the cottonwoods. This sound didn't belong here. I slowed my steps, eyes narrowing toward the far corner of the south pasture. At first I thought maybe a steer had gotten itself tangled in the barbed wire again, but as I drew closer, my heart began to pound harder. It wasn't a steer. It was a man. He was enormous, broad shoulders, arms corded with muscle, his copper-brown skin cut and bloodied by cruel strands of barbed wire that had caught him like a trap. His long black hair was tangled in the wind, his chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths, and his eyes, they found me instantly, dark, steady, and readable. In Apache. I froze where I stood. Every story I'd ever heard in town came rushing to mind: raids, ambushes, merciless warriors who struck without warning. Men in town spat the word Apache like it tasted bitter. My pulse thundered in my ears. I should have turned around, gone straight back to the house, maybe fetched the sheriff, but I didn't. Something in his gaze held me there. He didn't speak, didn't plead. He only watched me with a kind of quiet dignity, as though he refused to beg even while bleeding in the dirt. The wire had cut deep into his arms and across his ribs. His hands were bound by it, the cruel barbs biting into skin every time he shifted. I felt my throat tighten. The right thing, the safe thing, was to walk away, but safe had never been what kept a ranch running. I'd buried a husband, I'd worked these acres alone, and I knew what it was to hurt and have no one come. I knelt beside him. His eyes flickered in surprise, but he didn't move. My fingers worked quickly, tearing strips from the hem of my skirt. I could feel his breath on my cheek as I leaned in to press cloth to the worst of the cuts. His blood was hot against my hands. "You'll bleed out if I leave you here," I murmured, not knowing if he understood. The barbed wire fought me with every twist and pull, biting my palms. At one point my sleeve caught, and I cursed under my breath. He made no sound, just watched, silent as stone, though I saw his jaw tighten when the wire tore deeper. Finally, the last strand gave way. He staggered forward, nearly falling into me, his massive frame shuddering with exhaustion. I steadied him without thinking. My hands braced against his chest. For the briefest moment, the world narrowed to the warmth of him, the faint smell of smoke and sweat. Then he straightened, towering over me. My breath caught again, not in fear this time, but in the sharp awareness of the choice I had just made. I had freed an Apache warrior, and nothing on this prairie would be the same again. I had never invited a stranger into my home before, least of all an Apache warrior taller than any man I'd ever seen. But leaving him out there, bleeding and stumbling, wasn't an option I could stomach. He didn't ask for my help, didn't speak a word, but when I motioned toward the house, he followed. The prairie light had faded to a pale lavender by the time we reached my porch. I could hear the crickets starting their night song, and in that stillness, I became acutely aware of the risk I was taking. Folks in town didn't just dislike Apaches, they feared them. If anyone saw him here, I'd be branded a traitor, maybe worse. Inside, the warm glow of the kerosene lamp fell across the room, throwing his shadow large against the wall. I could see now how deep the cuts ran, angry, jagged wounds, especially across his ribs where the barbs had caught hardest. I fetched a basin of warm water, a clean rag, and my tin of salve. When I turned back, he was standing in the center of the room, silent, watching me like I was the one on trial. His gaze wasn't hostile, just measuring. I wondered if he thought me foolish, or if he was trying to decide whether he could trust me. "Sit," I said softly, pointing to the chair near the table. To my relief, he lowered himself into it. Up close, the raw power of him was unmistakable. Even sitting, his shoulders filled the space, his hands resting heavily on his knees, knuckles scarred. I knelt beside him and dipped the rag into the water. The first touch made him flinch just slightly, but he didn't pull away. I worked slowly, wiping away dirt and blood, feeling his eyes on me the whole time. His skin was warm under my fingers, the muscles shifting as I worked. At one point I looked up, and our eyes met. Something passed there, not quite understanding, but not distrust either. I spoke without thinking. "You'll heal, but only if you rest." My voice sounded softer than I meant it to, almost like I was talking to someone I'd known far longer than the past hour. When the worst of the wounds were cleaned, I smeared the salve across them. He didn't so much as grunt, though I knew it must have burned. I wrapped the deepest gashes with strips torn from an old bedsheet. His stillness made the work easier, but there was something unnerving about it, too like tending to a great, wounded animal that could decide at any moment to rise up. When I finished, I stood and motioned toward the small bedroom off the kitchen. "You can stay in there," I told him. "It's warm. You'll be safe." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he rose, his head ducking slightly under the low door frame, and stepped inside without a word. I lingered in the doorway a moment after, listening to the heavy silence settle between us. The storm lamp flickered on the table, casting light over my hands. They were still stained with his blood. I should have felt afraid of what he was, of what the town might do if they found out. But fear wasn't what settled in my chest that night. It was something else, something that felt a lot like resolve. The rooster's crow came too early, same as always. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside. The prairie air cool and damp with the scent of dew. My life had always started this way before dawn, with chores waiting like unpaid debts. But that morning was different. Through the gray half-light, I saw him. Tanka, that was the name I'd heard whispered in town before, though I didn't know yet if it was his. He was standing near the corral, one arm still bandaged, the other tossing feed to my horses like he'd been doing it his whole life. The animals didn't shy from him, even the skittish mare that barely let me touch her. I walked over slowly. "You don't need to work," I said. "You're hurt." He didn't answer, just looked at me once, then bent to hammer a loose rail back into place. The steady thunk of his hammer rang out over the quiet pasture. I should have stopped him, but truth be told, watching him work eased something in me I didn't know had been tight for years. Since my husband's death, the ranch had been running on stubbornness and prayer. Seeing those broad hands fixing fences, moving with purpose, was like watching the land breathe easier. By mid-morning, he'd patched his sections of fence and mended the hinge on the chicken coop door. He even brought in the milk pail from the barn without being asked. I busied myself with my own tasks, pretending not to notice how naturally he moved through the place. The ranch hands noticed, though. I'd hired 2 of them just last spring, young men from town who thought working for a widow would be easy going. They slowed when they saw him, their eyes narrowing. One spat in the dirt, the other muttered something I couldn't catch. But I didn't need to. I'd heard enough talk in town to know how quick suspicion could spread. By noon, I found the 2 of them leaning against the barn, whispering. I caught a few words of Apache, trouble, sheriff. My stomach nodded. When I went back to the house for lunch, Tanka followed, his footsteps heavy behind me. We ate in silence, me at the table, him at the far end. I thought about telling him to stay inside, out of sight, but something in me balked at the idea. He wasn't a secret I meant to hide. In the afternoon, he came with me to move cattle from the far pasture. He rode well, better than most cowboys I'd known, and his quiet presence at my side made the work go smoother. We spoke no words, but there was a rhythm to it, a kind of unspoken understanding. By the time the sun dipped low again, we'd done a full day's work. He didn't seem to tire, even with his wounds. And I felt lighter than I had in years. Still, as I washed my hands at the basin that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Maybe it was just the ranch hands. Maybe it was the whole town. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't sending him away. The prairie at night has a different kind of silence, one that settles deep, like the land is holding its breath. That evening, the moon rose full and bright, spilling silver across the grasslands. I'd finished the supper dishes and was just banking the fire when I heard the soft creak of the porch boards. He was standing out there, motionless in the moonlight, looking toward the far hills. His bandages were gone from his arms, replaced by strips of leather I hadn't seen before. In one hand, he held a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He looked at me once, then motioned with a tilt of his head. I hesitated, habit, I suppose, but there was no threat in his eyes, only a quiet insistence. I pulled my shawl around my shoulders and stepped out into the crisp night air. We walked together toward the open field beyond the barn, our boots whispering through dry grass. When we reached a flat stretch of ground, he knelt and began unwrapping the bundle. Inside were small pouches filled with dried leaves, a handful of polished stones, and what looked like a carved bone pipe. He arranged them carefully on a cloth, his hands moving with deliberate purpose. I stayed quiet, not wanting to disturb whatever this was. The moon caught in his hair, glinting off the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He lit a small twist of herbs, the smoke curling upward in thin ribbons. Then he began to chant. It was low at first, almost a hum, but the sound deepened, carrying a weight I could feel in my chest. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was both mournful and strong, as if it carried the voices of 1,000 before him. He gestured for me to kneel opposite him. My knees pressed into the cool earth as I obeyed. He placed a small stone in my palm, smooth, warm from his hand, and closed my fingers around it. For a moment, his hand lingered over mine. His eyes locked with mine, steady and searching. I didn't know the meaning of the ritual, but I understood its gravity. This wasn't just a gesture of thanks. It was something binding. The smoke thickened between us, carrying the scent of sage and earth. He touched his chest, then pointed to mine. No words, but the message was clear enough: protection. His for mine, mine for his. I nodded once, my throat tight. When it was done, he gathered the items with the same care he'd laid them out. We walked back toward the house in silence. The night air seemed sharper now, the stars brighter. I felt different, as though I'd stepped across some invisible line I hadn't known was there. That night, lying in bed, I realized I'd accepted something I couldn't name. Not just his presence here, not just his help. I had accepted a bond. The knock at the door came sharp and early. I knew that sound. It was the sheriff. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door to find Sheriff Colton standing there, his thumbs hooked into his belt. He was a stocky man with a sunburned face and eyes that always seemed to be looking for trouble. "Morning, Mrs. Myard," he said. "Mind if I step in?" My stomach sank, but I stepped aside. His boots clomped across the floor as he looked around the room, like he expected to find something hidden in the shadows. "I hear you've had company," he said. I didn't answer right away. He turned toward me, lips curling in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You know what I'm talking about. That Apache, big fella. Seen him working your fence line. Now, I don't need to remind you what folks think about Apaches wandering this close to town. And I sure don't need to tell you about the trouble that's been brewing lately." "What trouble?" I asked, though my voice was sharper than I meant. He tipped his hat back. 2 nights ago, Henderson's place was hit. Rifles gone, couple sacks of flour, some tools. Same thing happened at Barlow's. Now, I'm no fool. Folks in town are saying it's your new friend, and I'm inclined to agree. "He didn't do it," I said flatly. The sheriff arched a brow. "That's so. And what makes you so sure?" I didn't answer, because my reason wasn't one I could explain. I just knew. Colton sighed like a man who thought he was giving me a chance. "Look, Abigail, I like you, but if that Apache's guilty, I'll have no choice but to bring him in. And we both know what'll happen after that." My jaw tightened. "He's not guilty. And you're not bringing him anywhere." Studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." When he was gone, I went straight to the barn. Tanka was there, working a bridle with his long fingers. He looked up as I came in, reading my face before I spoke. I didn't need to explain. He knew. I told him about the thefts, about the sheriff's suspicions. His expression didn't change, but his hand stilled. I could see the insult in the set of his jaw. "We're going to find who really did it," I said, "before they come for you." We set out that afternoon, riding the ridge east of Henderson's place. It didn't take long before Tanka spotted something I'd missed entirely: hoofprints leading toward a dry creek bed, deeper than a ranch horse would leave. We followed them to a half-collapsed line shack. Inside, We found the stolen rifles, flour sacks, and tools stacked neatly in the corner. And crouched in the shadows were two men I recognized, Henderson's hired hands. They didn't even have time to draw before Tanka had them disarmed, and on their knees up by sundown, we brought the stolen goods back to Henderson's. The sheriff was there, looking like he'd swallowed something sour. "Guess I was wrong," he muttered. Tanka said nothing, but as we rode back to the ranch, the air between us felt heavier. It wasn't just the sheriff's suspicion we'd pushed back, it was the whole town's. For the first time, they'd seen the truth. The storm announced itself with a low rumble on the horizon. The kind you feel in your bones before you hear it. Out on the prairie, there's nothing to blunt its arrival, no hills, no tall buildings, just a wide, open sky turning an ugly green-gray. I was in the barn stacking hay when Tanka appeared in the doorway. He said nothing, just jerked his chin toward the sky. I followed his gaze. The clouds were rolling fast, like an angry tide. "Livestock," I said, "already moving." We split up without needing to discuss it, he toward the south pasture, me toward the chicken coop. The wind was picking up, tugging at my skirts, snapping the laundry line until the clothes whipped like flags. I wrestled the hens inside just as the first fat drops of rain hit the dust. By the time I made it back toward the main corral, Tanka was driving the cattle in, shouting sharp commands in a language I didn't know. His voice cut through the wind. And somehow the animals listened. Lightning split the sky, so bright it burned against my vision. Thunder chased it close behind. The air was alive, buzzing with electricity. The cows were skittish, but Tanka moved among them like a man born to it, quick, sure, unafraid. I climbed the fence to unlatch the far gate. My hands slippery with rain. He caught my eye across the corral, gave a quick nod, and herded the last of them through. Then came the wind in earnest, hard enough to shove me sideways. The barn doors banged open, and I heard the sickening crack of a fence post giving way. I ran toward it, skirts heavy with water, but Tanka was already there. He braced the post upright while I lashed it with rope, our hands working in frantic rhythm. By now the rain was a wall, drenching us through. My hair stuck to my face. His was plastered to his shoulders. The mud sucked at our boots with every step. When the worst of the animals were secured, we ducked inside the barn, breathless. The sound of the storm outside was deafening, rain drumming the roof, wind howling through every gap in the boards. For a moment we just stood there, dripping, our chests heaving in unison. I met his eyes in the dim light and felt something I couldn't name more than relief, more than gratitude. The storm wasn't just outside, it was between us two, pulling us closer, binding us tighter with every shared moment of danger. When it finally passed, the prairie was soaked and shining. Under a sky scrubbed clean, we stepped out together to survey the damage, fences down into places, a shed door torn loose, work for tomorrow. But tonight, the ranch still stood, and so did we. The morning after the storm, the air was clear and sharp, smelling of wet sage. We saddled the horses early, planning to ride the fence line and check for damage before the cattle wandered off. It felt good to move under that bright sky, the land washed clean, every color sharpened. We were 2 miles out when I saw it, a dust cloud, low and fast, rising from the north. At first, I thought it might be stray cattle, but then the shapes took form, riders, at least half a dozen, and not the kind who came calling for coffee and pie. Tanka saw them the same instant I did. His body stiffened, and his hand went to the rifle slung over his saddle. I recognized one of the riders as they drew closer, Jenkins, a mean-eyed drifter I'd seen in town a few times, always with trouble trailing behind him like a shadow. They slowed when they reached us, their horses blowing hard. Jenkins tipped his hat with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Widow Myard. Heard you've been keeping interesting company." His gaze slid to Tanka, lingering like a dare. I kept my voice even. "State your business." "It's simple," he said. "You've got what we want, good stock, a decent spread, and no man to protect it. Figure we'll take both of you in with the rest of it." "You're not taking anything," I said. Jenkins' smile widened, ugly. "Then I guess we'll just help ourselves." He reached for the rifle on his hip. The next moments blurred into motion. Tanka was off his horse in a flash, moving like the storm hadn't taken a drop of strength from him. His rifle came up, a warning shot cracking the air. My mare danced under me, hooves biting the wet ground. The outlaws scattered, some pulling their own guns, others circling to flank us. Tanka fired again, this time sending one man's hat spinning into the mud. I swung my horse to cut off another rider heading for the corral gate. My shotgun barked once, splintering a fence post near his leg enough to turn him back. Jenkins cursed and spurred his horse toward me, but Tanka intercepted him, dragging him clean out of the saddle with one massive arm. They hit the mud hard, grappling. Jenkins swung a fist, but Tanka caught it, twisting until the men cried out.
By the time I reined in beside them, two more of the gang were disarmed, rifles tossed into the grass. The last man standing hesitated just long enough for me to aim square at his chest. He dropped his gun and put his hands up. When it was done, we tied the gang together and marched them back toward town, muddy and sullen. The sheriff took one look at them and raised an eyebrow. "Self-defense," I said flatly. He didn't argue. As Tanka and I rode back toward the ranch, I glanced over at him. His hair was plastered to his face, his shirt torn, but his eyes were calm and shaken. That day, something changed in the way I saw him. He wasn't just the man I'd freed from the fence line. He wasn't just a helper or a guest. He was the ranch's protector. And, whether I admitted it yet or not, mine too. The sky was just starting to pale when I woke, the ranch still quiet after yesterday's fight. I found Tanka already outside, standing near the river that cut along the eastern edge of my land. The dawn light caught the mist rising from the water, turning it gold. I walked down to join him. Neither of us spoke. The river had been running strong from the storm, its voice a steady rush against the silence of morning. When I reached his side, he held out his hand. In his palm lay two small stones, smooth, river-worn, the colors of earth and bone. He gave one to me, closing my fingers gently around it. I looked at him in question, but he only tapped his chest, then touched my hand. Then he pressed the second stone to his own chest. I understood enough. We stood there for a long while, side by side, the river murmuring between us. I thought about the first day I saw him tangled in that cruel barbed wire, bleeding and silent. I thought about the nights we'd worked under the moon, the danger we'd faced together, the trust that had grown between us without a single word spoken. The future was uncertain. The town might never fully accept him. There might be more storms, more outlaws, more nights where the only thing between us and ruin was our grit and each other's strength. But I knew this: he would never leave me to face them alone. And I would never turn him away. I reached for his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm, strong, steady. When we turned back toward the house, the sun was rising behind us, spilling light over the land we now shared. I could feel the stone in my palm, grounding me, binding me to this moment, to him. We walked back slowly in step. No words passed between us. None were needed. From that day on, the river vow stood. Whatever came, we would face it together. Always.